So welcome, Matthew. Thank you for accepting our invitation to be our guest on this show. And this is, of course, to mark the African Day. And of course, we are discussing around unifying Africa through creativity, and particularly the role of the creative industry in bridging the continent. That's where we'll be talking more about. For our listeners, we have here Matthew Otor. He's our guest and be giving us some insight into his experience and expertise on our topic today. So, just to break into it, Matthew, I would want to give you a bit of response before I start diving into the questions. So do you want to perhaps maybe share a little bit about yourself?
Okay, my name is Matthew Otor. Primarily, I think I'm a spoken word poet, but these days a lot of content, like a lot of content and content work. But from my perspective, it's content from my perspective. So I do a lot of content storytelling, as it were. So even when I have to do content work for brands, it's more from a storytelling perspective, not the editing more videos. Or you get, I feel like at the very core of what makes us human is stories. And a lot of brands do not realize that. So they get fancier mics, fancier cameras, and then storytelling is nothing. So I'm a spoken word poet who does brand storytelling.
Okay.
And
Exactly.
Okay, I think that works.
No, you can go on. You can share a bit more. Let's know the many hats you wear.
I know just that, to be honest. But I mean, I've been in London for a few months, so because it's in the context of what we are talking about today, basically being Pan-African, representing Africa. So I just thought to put that in there. I feel like it adds a bit of context to today's conversation.
It definitely does. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I have some very particular questions in my mind that is probably off script as well, that I think you might be in a good position to also contribute to. But then, let's just go straight into it. So what does Pan-Africanism mean to you?
Pan-Africanism. To me, I believe we have to, especially as creative, we have to understand that Africanism doesn't necessarily have to be about Africa, but the African. Like uniqueness, as it were. So I'm trying to say you can be unique and represent Africa without necessarily talking about Africa, because a lot of times we make the mistake of believing only artists or creatives or poets that are doing very African poems are Pan-African, as it were. You're Pan-African if you're telling the story of a Nigerian boy who literally struggles with, because a lot of times our stories are actually, someone told me something once that your story is an extension of someone else's story. So while telling your own story, you're telling someone else's story. So I'm saying just being yourself, just telling your own story is adding to that narrative. So being Pan-African, it doesn't necessarily mean history, doesn't necessarily mean culture, as much as those things are important. I'm saying your everyday experience in telling those stories, you are furthering the African narrative. It sounds weird, but I think so.
No, it doesn't sound weird, but I think it's just the way the word Pan-Africanism has been branded in the past. But in the true sense and essence of what it really means, it's that anyone who is of African descent, number one, and may or may not be precisely residing in Africa. And just as you simply put it, it's telling the African story, whether you are, whether you are in Africa or not. But you, as being who you are, an African by blood or by birth or by your ancestors, own your own right and your own stories. And therefore, in owning that essence of who you are, that particular fact you cannot change, you are being Pan-African in that. So I think you actually did simplify the answer in a way, and I'm glad you put it that way. So just going in the next, question, really, I wanted to find out, like, which form of artistic expression do you use the most potential to promote and also bridge the cultural divides? But, before you answer that question, I would like to hear your thoughts. What are the obvious cultural divides first? We talk about, which one are better in promoting Africanism or Pan-Africanism?
Cultural divides. To be honest, I currently work with a brand. It's called the African Store. And one of the things they plan to become like the Amazon for African product for Africans that are outside of Africa. So they've added with groceries, that's food stuff, and they're going to definitely go into other things that are quite African groceries, and they're just about launching. But in the research, and because I've been with them from the onset, I've come to realize that we're so similar in Africa, food-wise. Like, so we did use like in market in Senegal, there's okra in Ghana, like food-wise, we're so similar. Language-wise, really, Afrobeat is very Nigerian, to be honest.
It is Nigerian.
It is like I'm trying not to be too, because there's been some controversy. It's Nigerian, and then we know the Amapiano is South African. We know Ghana has their own sound. So someone was talking about the Ghanaian music, however, Nigerians literally own the Ghanaian music space. And I was saying it is because are refusing to accept or refusing to the person literally music cannot compete with Afrobeat. So Ghanaian singing that style, which is Ghanaian, and Afrobeat. But he said he also understands that Ghanaians do not they enjoy Afrobeat, but they also want to hear their own kind of music.
Yeah.
So I'm saying the conflict in there is you should accept your identity, to be honest, because as we're talking arts, we're talking creativity. To an extent, we then have to talk about identity and then marketing. I put out an EP recently, and I've had a lot of people reach out, especially for one of the poems on the EP, saying they want to produce a short film for it.
Yeah.
Somebody reached out to me. The poem is 4 minutes long or 3 minutes long, and he said he wants to produce a short film for it. I'm like, I think he's big. About 1 million followers on Instagram. Probably he was quite a sunny because I have like 6K. But he was like, he likes the short film. That he sounds like production. He sounds like a short film. Can we do a short film for him? I'm like, yeah, I'm actually thinking of doing one. Houses that are interested. Then he was like, no, you want something like a 4-minute short film. That it should be at least 30. So he was like, can I do a script for a first? In that conversation, he was sounding more like, it just sounded like it and make it what it was not. Do I want a short film made out of my original idea? I do. That wouldn't happen. I want it to happen after I made my own short film first. Short film for the piece. So it's he just wants to take that and make it into something else, right? So I wouldn't say there is a divide, there's just a problem, right? Owning up to and what you are, and then running with it to the.
I think I totally agree with you, and in to make it more simplified is the thing that we have more in common than differences than we actually know. And with the food part, you assume when other Africans are trying to their meal or their delicacies to you, they tell you, oh, this is like the Nigerian egusi soup. This is like the so there's, and you could relate to it, and you can say, oh, maybe just this is a little bit more, this is a bit less, and you could easily connect with it, and sometimes when they do that, when I meet a lot of, Africans and they do that, in my mind, I'm like, okay, you don't even see the need to want to know the name. So unlike maybe when you go to Greece or to France, you have to know the name to be able to communicate what it is that you want to have or enjoy. You have, but for us, we could easily say, oh, this is how we have it, in where we come from. Do you have something similar? Have it, actually. The only difference may be just how they eat it, or how they serve it, or but definitely that oftentimes the look is usually the same, to be honest. The day, and that's what advertising has done. Have done has done to us in the world. But then, being sticking to your goal, what you really want to do Hollywood or in the movie industry and are trying to be independent, even music artists, the record label, and they are going out to go through the rough part of doing things on their own terms, be more, creatively involved in. So,
I was talking to someone who in the industry here in London recently, and he told me the same thing. You really can't want to maintain identity full scale. Like if you want to go public marketing wise, at some point you have to drop the creativity, because if, for instance, because he is into real estate, but real estate for production. So if you need a house, if you need a beach house, you need a warehouse for a movie, he's the person you call. So we're talking about my spoken word album. And if I want to make anything if I want to make probably one of the, get a camera, I can get the space and film myself and make a short film. If I want and get the big names involved, that I'll get that piece, get the script, give it to someone who is going to be in charge and manage this project. That person is going to review it, and they'll tell you if it's marketable or not. If it's not, they would literally work around it.
Yeah.
Then go find funding for it. Then when they get funding, they get locations, they get sound, they get people. But that process of putting it in a place where it's get funded, after you get like to that point where they approve it for funding, it might not be your art anymore. So he was like, you have to, you're comfortable with that. Like a lot of artists and creatives you see, a lot of them, like there's something called A&R in music, like literally someone that directs where the album goes. Like albums are not usually the musicians. There's an AR, there's a strategy that thinks, oh, let's put this on. Let's put. So it's very, very what you say.
Yeah, I totally agree. And now dive into the other part of and I'm really eager to hear your response, really, like what form of artistic expression, the more has the more potential to promote pan-Africanism?
I would say storytelling, to be safe, because I wouldn't say music or painting or poetry.
Because they are all telling, actually.
Exactly. So any artistic expression that holds storytelling in high regard, like I said earlier, not exactly a specific story or culture. Basically, the everyday African story, past or going back to the future, and we're not forgetting today, to be honest. We're not African, or today isn't African enough about. We always go back, something you get. So storytelling, and I feel like a lot of arts, especially the ones that have the most publicity, are not doing justice to that, especially music, as it were. They're not doing justice to that. Things that are being sung are not exactly. Of course, there are a few artists that stand, but there are a lot of things. The biggest song pan-African. They're very, very just entertainment, purely. So if you do an art piece that has good story behind it, if you do a spoken word piece, if you do a movie, telling really is that one art or the crux of any art that will promote Africa.
Yeah. So I guess, well, what it means is that all of us have a lot of work to do. It doesn't mean that one particular kind of creative expression is more important or has a season. So it doesn't have a season. It's just exactly how you tell your story. At the end of the day, with the tool that you have, whether it's the gifts you have or the channel you're using, or even the kind of story you choose to tell. I think that's where there's a bit of difference, the kind of story you are particular about in that sense. So so I'll go on to my next question, really is, can you share, like, you've mentioned a few of them, but can you share like successful examples of how the creative industry has, been used to promote unity and solidarity across the continent? I know we've talked about divide and differences and not enough work, but where have you seen the other way around that it has worked and it's something significant and that is standing the test of time and that will always stand the test of time?
If I wouldn't have to think too far, especially I feel like also it's because Africans in diaspora are not as many. So when we find ourselves, we always kind of like bond really tightly. So I would say little pockets of creative events. So first, Africans are few in diaspora. Then creatives are fewer. It means creatives are fewer. But then these little pockets of diaspora and creatives doing as much as they can. One is London School of Economics. I even have an event with them next week. They call it Ubuntu Cafe. It's all of Africa. So we have people from other universities even come, because most universities do not even have things like that, especially universities that do not have a lot of like as much African population. Oxford, like the Africans in the Ivy League schools, but there are not a lot of Africans there. So a lot of them come to London School of Economics for the Ubuntu Cafe. It's purely creativity. We have talk sessions, but then we have poetry, we have music, but it's purely very African. And then it's things you would not see every day. People you would not see every day, or attires you would not see. Everybody comes looking really, really African. I would say that's one organization of organizations here and there that putting in the work, because a lot of times there are no incentives, to be honest. And then in the West, a lot of creatives live off their art. So if you're organizing an event of that sort, if it's not an open mic, you have to pay them, right? So, and they do really well. The last was like an African summit. They had governors from across Africa. I think the day I performed, the governor of Kenya was there with some of his commissioners and they are doing really well in that uni because they have quite a African population. So I would say that is a representation of African communities outside Africa. They do really well to bond it together and make it happen for the narrative.
Awesome. I think that's very interesting to hear, in that sense, but it's also sad to hear how small you have decided to be in that sense. Something like that should have been a carnival, a festival in that sense. So so I wanted to also go, go deep a little bit further, really. Very similar to what you have described in the London School of Economics and the Ubuntu event. What other kind of platforms do you think Pan-Africanism can, have the potential to start off or kick off, or that is already existing? And where do you see, locally back in Africa or in Nigeria or, in the diaspora, where do you see those kinds of opportunity and platforms?
I feel like, especially when it comes to creativity, especially for Africa, we have to bond together. There is, like I said before, there is a lot of divide. It's in style, I have a friend, I'm in the poetry space, and I had a friend who had one video go really over, and then she had done jazzy pickets up, she had invites to concerts, and then she became more active. And something that happened, I am a content creator, with being more active in the social space, especially with the kind of content poetry is. It means you might want to water it down to stay more active, because poetry is not, personally, easy for me to write. I don't just write off the cuff. It takes me processing it through. I think lots of different perspectives. I don't just I've been to events like freestyle. I'm like, I love freestyle. I don't know what that means. I'm a rapper. I can just throw words around, but I have to have a definite start point and a destination when I write, basically. So,
all right. So I'll just go straight into my next question, and it was more about technology. In what ways do you think creatives, or maybe particularly your industry, can leverage technology in promoting, Pan-Africanism? Because the whole idea, we want to address the world of Africans or Africa, wherever you are. So how can technology actually drive that? And in what way can people utilize technology for this particular purpose?
I feel like one of the most right now trending theme in technology is the advancements in artificial intelligence. I feel like we know of technology to reach people, which is like what we're doing now. We're having a remote meeting. We know of technology to communicate, social media and all that. But before artificial intelligence, there are limited options to, further or help you achieve your goals faster. Either storytelling, like for instance, if you're a poet, for instance, it's easy to put visuals to your story if you know how to use a program like Midjourney, which generates images from from text. So that way you can, if you are doing an audiobook or a chat book, for instance, you can then have visuals without, spending too much on getting someone that is a visual artist. So I'm saying the easiest way, to be honest, is artificial intelligence right now, in the sense that you make use of the available tools to further your production. One of the challenges we have, especially in Africa, is resources, right? Paying people. I know of a friend who had an amazing project, then he was held back because he couldn't pay a producer, right? So we have that limitation of resources, and I feel like technology cuts or bridges that gap, because there is a tool by Adobe for it. I do content, so I know a lot of content tools. There's a tool at Adobe that you can literally record a video with your phone, and you just throw the audio into that tool, and it sounds crisp like it's a microphone. If you want to create content on social media or YouTube, you don't need a professional mic right now, right? All you need is maybe a phone. There are even tools that would enhance the visuals from your phone footage. There are tools that will make the audio better. There are tools that will help you generate. So you can literally sit in your room and do things that before it will require you to call actually 10 people or spend a lot of money. Maybe you need to get a mic, you need to get a graphics designer, you need to get this. Right now, you can literally be by yourself and do a good work. Even if it's not exactly up there, it's going to be consumable. So I feel like creatives can use technology to bridge that resource gap by learning how these AI tools work. It will help you bridge the gap of resources and then get work done faster, get more work done, and inherently is the volume thing. We need to put more work out there to tell the stories we want to tell.
Awesome. Thank you so much for breaking that down into that essence. So you spoke about, when you talk about tools, yes, a lot of them are free, accessible, that you could use them, but still you need funding sometimes. And the creative funding is one of the most, funding generally for any kind of business or whatever it is you do is difficult, but for creatives, it is particularly very challenging. How do you have an idea? Do you have something you want to share with our audience on how to navigate, accessing funding, and what other kind of funding can actually support the growth of creatives or Pan-African creatives in that sense? Because funding is beyond money, Sometimes we only think of money when we think of funding, but it's a lot, all other kind of resources encompassing. So what are those kind of opportunities or kind of funding that you think, African creatives are overlooking or not fully utilizing? Or what direction do you think can point our audience to?
Two very specific things you said is, one, funding is beyond money. Also, you mentioned opportunities. So it's understanding first that funding is beyond money, and then looking out for opportunities. So there'll be people, there'll be brands, there'll be other creatives who might not necessarily be offering much in the immediate, but potentially they can connect you or they can give you. Of course, we know the cliche of I'll pay you with platform. Like, our platform is huge, but there are people that you should hear that from and take them seriously, right? Not necessarily because they want to take one of the most important relationship. I even did an album listening party in Lagos recently, and the venue I used was just an event. They were filmmakers. They were just reviewing movies, and they were like, they need a poet, and there was no payment. The amount that owns the building. So the event said they didn't have a fund. At that point, I was just very happy to perform. It was like 2019 or 2018. I was just happy to tell my story. I didn't really care about performance and fees and that. But then apparently the person that owned the building was in that event. And he was like, those people that would say, I used to write, I used to do art, I used to do poetry. But then I started doing business, and he was like, the guy fared so much. He literally gave me his building. I used to do open mics in 2019. All my open mics were free. Like, I used to do open mics, I think once every Wednesday every week. If there was something that built my brand, the kind of brand I have now, I had an event recently. The tickets available were about 80. The tickets sold out. We extended it to 100. We sold out, and we still had people, about 50 people that came in at the event venue. Like, we sold about 50 people at the event. And another poet who was like, how did you manage? Because usually poets, we struggle to monetize. You can be an amazing poet, but then once you put money, price on your work, a lot of people don't show up. And it's like, how have you built this kind of brand that you literally, even if it was not exactly expensive, the fact that people always turn up when you call. And it was from that open mic I used to do. I used to do events every month before COVID. And he gave me the venue for free. He would get a
usually the
photographer.
bulk of the funds anyway.
He gave me a photographer, a videographer, and refreshment.
That's quite generous.
So, and it was a rooftop. It was a rooftop, like a very aesthetic place. And then he would get me a videographer, a photographer, and then the rooftop bar. He owns the building, so he tell him to serve refreshment to my guests. And I'm like, all that off one event that I didn't even get paid for. Even up until now, he's one of the most important. He was going to get me meetings with people in Nollywood if I was in Lagos for my EP. So I told him I wanted to make short films. He was like, it's going to be hard for him to set me up in meetings because I'm not in Lagos. Like, those people are very people of affluence. You cannot do Zoom meetings with them. And they will take me more seriously. And he was like, what he can do is set me up on quick meetings. So it might not be scheduled. It might be like, Matthew, I need to go meet this person at Lekki today. So he was like, because I'm not in Lagos, he really won't be able to help that much. But that's how much just one event did for me, right? So to understand that funding is beyond money and opening your eyes to opportunities. For instance, me being here, I feel like it's beyond all the events I have next week. For platforms, LSC invited me for their last conference. Even if they've offered, they were like, there'll be sufficient remuneration in the next event. The last event, there wasn't sufficient remuneration in that sense. But then the platform was something I could not miss. We had literally had governors in that space. We had people from UNICEF Youth Ambassadors. We had UN. And that's the platform you would be silly because how much do you get paid to say, oh, no, if you're not paying, I'm not coming. So to understand that funding is beyond money. Sometimes it's putting yourself in the right place. It's getting allegiance to the right people and the right organizations. And then there are platforms there are places of people you will never meet just being by yourself and just receiving money. There are even times when you offer to do things for free when you see how big or how well connected these platforms are. So I'll be saying just on
a network and in that sense.
Absolutely. Just understand and open your eyes to opportunities, to be honest.
Yeah. So, with all that we've said now, I think a lot of it is still driven by, the creator themselves. And it's more like, how are you finding your own part? Just in summary, how are you finding your own part while also holding the identity that is bigger than you, which is Africa or pan-Africanism? Because now there's no exactly clear part for an African to become a successful creative. So instead of creating a dog situation or finding who is better, who is not, or who shines brighter than the other, it's more of how do we see ourselves in another creative, whether we're in the same industry or not, or sector of creative, and to make sure that we find, like you said in the beginning of this conversation or interview, to find what is that common goal that we can hold our hands towards in that sense while we do what we do. Because if that part was created in the first place or it's available to us, I don't think we'll be this much divided in a way. Sure. And it won't be so difficult, with the way we're trying to navigate it. And of course, that's why, a platform like APVA is here to say, okay, let's dump everything of creative and talking about creative in here. And then let's see how we can start creating our part. But it's still, the onus is still on us, our own responsibility to say, okay, I know this person, or I feel this person should be part of the event, or speak on behalf of somebody, negotiate. What are you getting? What do you think this person deserves to be paid? All those things. I think those are factors that, coming into upholding the identity of Pan-Africanism or being African in that sense, or being of African descent in that sense. So it is holding that identity in everything that you do, no matter how difficult it is, because the thing with creative is that at a point in time, definitely you will find your people, and definitely you get paid fairly at one point in time. But not everyone can hold off for so long, in being creative at the same time trying to survive. It's a very difficult journey to take through. So our final question, Matthew, and thank you so much for being so pragmatic in how you have presented your responses to our questions. And this is, what is your hope, for the African creative industry? How can, collaborations between creative help to achieve, these goals? And maybe you can just describe a bit of that collaboration in that sense.
Something I barely see is like cross collaboration. We do well, we try, we have some efforts as silos of like creative silos. So there are poetry events, poetry concerts, poetry festivals, there are fashion events, but you would hardly see maybe a few, but you would hardly see a poetry event that's probably something I wanted to do before I left Lagos was like a poetry event with a fashion show. So instead of them walking out to music, they walk out to poetry. That's something I really wanted to do before I left. And maybe when I get back to Lagos, I'll still work on it. So basically get fashion brands from across Lagos, and then we all come together and have poets. So instead of, because we've seen them walk out to, you get, it's nobody said it has to be music, right? So
Exactly.
So I feel like we have to be more open to collaborations, because first we have to learn from the industries where it has worked, and the pathway is very seamless. I live in the West now, at least for a while I'll be here, and I know how much they value. It's not even just monetary, attention wise. When people used to say back home, even if somebody's working, I studied architecture, so I understand before even creativity. Architecture is sort of art and science, but before art, purely art, I understood from architecture that people didn't really value intellectual property. Right? They'll tell you, are you not just drawing on paper?
Just draw this,
But then when the bricklayer comes and says we need 3 trucks, they literally drop the money because they know the house is not getting busy if they don't buy the 3 trucks of sand. And then the person that is designing the house, which literally is more important than even the sand, they're like, it's not just draw on paper. So it means first we have to work together to correct that mindset. We can't do it individually. Correct the mindset of creativity is disposable. That's what we feel. I was watching an interview about this time last week. I can't remember his name, and he was like, everybody thinks art, poetry is not necessary. Like everybody laughs at the poet. Like he was giving an analysis of a poet performing a poem as in between a commercial, and people were like, can this commercial just go up? Let me continue watching the football match or whatever. Like everybody laughs at the poet, and he says that same man that is laughing, his wife breaks his heart, or his father dies, or he loses something, or he wins something, and then he feels something that he cannot express in words. He then looks for a poet who has felt the same thing and put it in words. And he's like, so you come to realize that beyond entertainment, poetry, or our art form as poets, is at the crux of what makes us human. We are able to articulate into words things that people feel and they cannot even explain. Because that's what makes poetry special. So I'm saying it's getting our African communities to the point where they see that the intellectual property is actually much more important than the house you build. Like, because we are fine with just putting blocks together and constructing something humongous and ugly and calling it our own house now. But it's much more than that. And I feel like it's not there. I feel like we lost it along the way. Because if you look at history, look at those artifacts from Benin, that is art. I don't know when we lost that, to be honest. Like, you need a creative mind. You need someone that is not more about economics and mass producing. Like some of those things, people calm down. Look at the things the hunters in the West used to wear. That is art. Like somebody calmed down to put those things together. So I feel like we are losing that because we are becoming very economical. But how we can get that back is by unifying, looking for avenues, artists, painters, singers, poets, storytellers, having events, building on each other's platforms, and then getting the bigger voices to pick on it. But we can't do it by ourselves, to be honest.
I totally see it as clear as day when you said it. And even just talking about using poetry for fashion, that had never really occurred. Like who who wrote that on stone that that is how it should be. But what just comes to mind a lot is how dancers now in Nigeria are now revered and are seen as artists.
Exactly.
In those days, they used to be like the wakapas, as we say it, you
But
know,
if you
like
paved the way,
used to be. But now people are proudly saying I'm a dancer, you know.
somebody paved the way. It was Tess Cafe with her Guinness World Record. Then there's this young man called Pokoli. So that's what I'm telling poets. I just need a few people to pave the way, to be honest.
Yes, exactly. So it's just to, you know, hold that torch high and, you know, and just push forward, because like it's, and now you can't see any music video without proper dances that are properly curated, and they have wardrobe, they have makeup, you know, they have a whole body that's taken care of as part of the crew, you know. So now they're seen as real people, even presenters and radio hosts. You know, it took time before people could really see them to say that this is, you know, something creative, that nobody can sound like this other person. And I think over time, for people who have tried to sound like other people, were washed out because they didn't have their own identity. They were not original, you know, in that sense. So I think you definitely have passed the message there, and I'm sure our viewers are totally in sync on this, and I hope they're going to be holding the torch, and so that we can keep moving the Pan-Africanism agenda forward in that sense. So thank you, Matthew, for spending time with us and for being here and for sharing your journey and your experiences with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right then. Bye.
Take care.